Recording. Today's Daf Yomi is Yevamos Daf Mem Hey, Yevamos 45. So we're going to start on the bottom of Mem Dalet Amud Beis, on the bottom of 44b. 3 lines from the bottom. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabba Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Hakol Modim. Everybody admits. So everybody admits that Eved ve'Ovei Kochavim Habal Ba'as Yisrael Shavlad Mamzer. Everybody admits that when there is an Eved is a Canaanite slave, somebody who's not Jewish, who is, typically speaking, the Canaanite slave, it has to do some of the commandments of the Jew, the time bound, but they're exempt from time bound positive commandments, but they're not of the Jewish people. So an Eved and an idolater who have relations with a woman who is Jewish, Shavlad Mamzer, the offspring under those circumstances is a Mamzer. So first of all, we know what the Gemara says, Hakol Modim, everybody admits, and the Gemara is going to spend the next daf trying to figure out who the everybody is, because it's certainly not everybody. And that's not how we rule today. We rule halachically that the offspring of a non-Jewish man and a Jewish woman is a Jew and is not a mamzer. So the Gemara wants to know, who is this Hakol Modim? Man Hakol Modim. When Rabbi Yochanan says everybody admits that this is the law, who are they referring to? So the Gemara says Shimon HaTeimani, that maybe this is the position of Shimon the Teimani. The Afagav the Amar Shimon HaTeimani Ein Mamzer Michai Ve'Lavin. Even though Shimon HaTeimani says there is no mamzer from Chai Ve'Lavin, even though Shimon HaTeimani said that there is no mamzer from Chai Ve'Lavin, what does that mean? That Shimon HaTeimani had said that if it's just a regular prohibition, then the offspring of such a union, does not create a mamzer, unlike a kares penalty. Hani Mili, when does he say that? We're on the top of 45a. He only says that from a circumstance where the prohibition is such that if they went ahead and got married, the marriage would be legally binding. That's where we say the offspring is not a mamzer. But here, the Gemara is suggesting that since if an idolater or the Eved was with the Jewish woman, since there's no capability of effectuating a legally binding marriage, therefore it's like the union of a kares penalty, and therefore the offspring is a mamzer. That's the Gemara's first suggestion. So the Gemara says, Meisvei, we challenge that because we have a brisa which we've already cited earlier. Ovei Kochavim ve'Eved habal ba'as Yisrael havlad mamzer. It says that idolater and the Eved that are with the Jewish woman, the offspring is a mamzer. Whereas Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Omer ein mamzer ela mimi she'isura isur erva ve'onash kares. And this is the identical position of Shimon HaTeimani. So Gemara is identifying this position of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda with Shimon HaTeimani, and the Gemara is saying that there is no mamzer unless it's an isur erva and onash kares. And as Rashi says, and this Tana is exactly like Shimon HaTeimani. So often we see when there are two Tanaim, we say the same thing. The Gemara tries to draw a distinction between them. And here we're saying the opposite, that they are the same Tana, and they are saying that the idolater or the Eved who's with the Jewish woman is not a mamzer. So therefore, it can't be, when it says Hakol Modim, when Rabbi Yochanan says Hakol Modim, it can't be a reference to Shimon HaTeimani. Now Amar Rav Yosef, so Rav Yosef comes along and says, Man Hakol Modim. Who is it when we say everybody admits that this offspring of an idolater and a Jewish woman is a mamzer? Who is that? Rebbe. It's the position of Rebbe. We know Rebbe was the editor of the Mishnahs, Rebbe Huda Nasi, and Afagav the Rebbe Omer Eina Dvaro Mahalalu Amurim El Divrei Rebbe Akiva. And even though Rebbe had said, and Rebbe is going to say on 52a, that Rebbe says that Rebbe had said with respect to after you've done chalitza, and then you want to come along and do Yibam. Rebbe said that there is no Bia Achar Chalitza, that meaning to say you wouldn't even need a get from the second woman and after that act. And then he says that's only said according to Rabbi Akiva, but he himself didn't follow that, Rashi says. And so but nevertheless, even though Rebbe says that later on, even though Rabbi says, the Leilu and he himself doesn't follow that. He himself doesn't say that the chalutza is like an erva. Nevertheless, but Rebbe himself would be of the position that if it was an idolater or a slave, he would admit that the offspring of such a union is indeed a mamzer. That's what Rebbe, he would be indeed of that position. So the Gemara says, the Kiyasa Rav Dimi, Amar Rav Yitzchak Rav Dumi, Mishim Rabbeinu, Ovik Chavam Ve'evet Abal Bas Yisrael Avad Mamzer. And indeed, Rav Dimi, when he came, and we know that whenever Rav Dimi comes from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, that soon after that, typically Ravin's going to come, and we'll see that Ravin will show up in our Gemara. But Rav Dimi said, in our Rebbe's taught in the land of Israel that the offspring of such a union is indeed a mamzer. And presumably, when he says our Rebbe's, he's referring to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Rabbi Acha Sarabir, Rabbi Tachon, Breder Rabbi Chiva, Ish Kfar Aka. What happened? Paro Kanu Shluyasa da Aso Me'armon L'Tiveria. They redeemed the certain women who came from Armon to Tiberias. Where is Armon? It could be Armenia, or it could be someplace closer. They redeemed some of these women who had become pregnant. One of the women had actually become pregnant from an idolater. Also, coming to Rabbi Ami, they came in front of Rabbi Ami and they wondered what's the status of this offspring. So Amar Lahu, Rabbi Ami said, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Chanina, Naamri Ovik Chom ve'Eved Abba Shov Van Mamzer. He said we have all these people who say that in such a circumstance, the offspring is a mamzer. So Amar Rav Yosef said, excuse me, Rabuso Milshav Gavri. That's not how we determine the law. We don't just count up which rabbis say one thing and which rabbis say the other thing. Rabbi Shmuel Babavel, Rabbi Shimon Levi, Bar Kapar, Bar Yisrael. I can give you 4 people who say the opposite. Rabbi Shmuel in Babylon, Rabbi Shmuel ben Levi and Bar Kapara in the land of Israel. And some say V'amri lechalufi Bar Kapar v'ayoi ziknei taram. Some say take out Bar Kapar and put in the elders of the south. Da'amri ovik chavam ve'eved abal bas Yisrael avad kosher. And they say that if an idolater was with a Jewish woman, the offspring is not a mamzer, the offspring is kosher. So therefore, don't like cite just opinions when I have more opinions the other way. Elamar of Yosef Rebbe. So who is the one who said this? Who is the one who says this idea that the offspring of an idolater with a Jewish woman is a mamzer? That's the position of Rebbe. The Kiyas or Avdimi, Amar Rav Yitzchak Bar Avdumi, Mishim Rabbeinu, Amar Ovik Chavam Eved Abba Bas Yisrael Van Mamzer. And indeed, Rabbi Yosef cites this opinion, and and here we see that Rabbeinu, our teacher, is a reference to Rebbe. That Rebbe is of the position that the idolater with the Jewish woman creates the mamzer. Rabbi Shimon Levi Omer Avlad Mekulko. He says, Rabbi Shimon Levi says that the idolater with the Jewish woman does not create a mamzer, but it creates an offspring who is Mekulko. A Mekulko is less severe than a mamzer. A Mekulko seems to be somebody. It means like messed up, somebody who's not allowed to marry a Kohen. So, and that's what the Gemara says. Laman, when Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says this, who is he referring to? Ile Melekahal. If you want to say he's referring to the regular community that's Mekulko, that they can't marry into the Jewish community, but it can't be. Ha'amar Rabbi Yeshua Vlad kosher. Rabbi Yeshua says the offspring is kosher. El Kahuna. It must be that it is that's Mekulko to the Kohanim. That Rabbi Shimon Levi says that the offspring of an idolater with a Jewish woman is not able to marry a Kohen. To kul amarai demachshiri modu shavlat pagam l'kahuna. That even those rabbis who say that the offspring of an idolater with a Jewish woman is not a mamzer, they still admit that the offspring is not able to marry a Kohen. And how do they learn that out? Mikal v'chomer mi'almana. They derive it from a logical argument from a widow. What's the logical argument from the widow? What's the kal v'chomer from the widow? Because we say ma'almana l'kohen gadol she'ein isura shava b'kol. Just like a widow to the high priest, it's not isura, is not shava b'kol. That the prohibitions are not equal all around. Meaning to say that nobody else has that prohibition. She's only prohibited to the high priest. And nevertheless, we say b'na pagum. Nevertheless, we say her offspring is not allowed to marry a Kohen. Zushe isura shava b'kol. This prohibition, the prohibition of being with an idolater, is equivalent to everybody. Eno din sheb'na pagum. For sure, her offspring should not be allowed to marry the Kohen. So the Gemara says that's a bad argument. So, but because the widow to the Kohen Gadol, the reason why the offspring can't marry a Kohen is because the widow herself becomes mischalala. She herself loses her status. So hachanami. So here also the Gemara says it's the same idea. Kivan shenivela, when this daughter of an Israelite is with the idolater, she herself becomes pesula. She herself becomes a disqualified. Rabbi Yochanan Mishim Rabbi Shimon, that if there is an idolater who's with a Jewish woman, he disqualifies her from being able to marry a Kohen, as it says, Kohen kitiyeh almana ukrusha. When the daughter of a Kohen will be when she will be either widowed or divorced, and then she'll be able to return to her father's home. She has no children and continue to eat the truma in his home. But when does that apply? That's only if she was with a man with whom the marriage will be binding. She could become a widow or a divorcee. This excludes if she was with a man where she cannot become a widow or a divorcee, then she becomes disqualified from eating the truma. So we see from here that we're left with, we don't have a proof. The Kal V'chomer is broken down because we don't have a Kal V'chomer why we say that such a woman is disqualified from being able to be with the Kohen. So Amalei Abaye, my chazit is samchas. So Abaye says to Rav Yosef, to his Rebbe Rav Yosef, you are saying that you're following the position of Rav Ushmuel. You're following the position of Rav Dimi, who says that Rebbe is the one who says that the offspring of an idolater and a Jewish woman is a mamzer. He says, why are you relying upon that? My chazos to samchas ad Rav Dimi, smocha de Ravin. Follow the teaching of Ravin. Remember, I said every time Rav Dimi comes, Ravin comes from Eretz Yisrael, brings a tradition soon afterwards, often contradictory. So Ravin brought a different tradition from the land of Israel. To Kiyasa Ravin, when Ravin came from land of Israel to Babylon, Amar Rabbi Nasan Rabbi Yehuda Nasi Morim Ba'etera. He said that Rabbi Nasan and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said that an idolater and a Jewish woman creates a kosher child, not a mamzer. Uman Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and we know Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is Rebbe, and so therefore it's allowed, or the offspring is kosher. Rav Mora Ba'etera. Rav also ruled that the offspring of an idolater and a Jewish woman is kosher. There was once a case where a student came in front of Rav, and he says to Rav, it's a very interesting story. He says to Rav, what's the story of an idolater man with a Jewish woman? So Rav said, Vlad kosher. The offspring is kosher. So this man who was a great Torah scholar, he says to Rav, okay, so that means I'm kosher because my father was an idolater, my mother was Jewish. He said, now I want to marry your daughter. Rav said, well, not so fast. Rav says, no, I'm not going to give it to you. I'm not giving you my daughter. Somebody else's daughter is okay for you, but not my daughter. So Amar Shimi Barchil Rav, Amri Inchi Gamla B'madai Akava Rakada. So there's a folk expression that the camel and Medea can dance in a kav, and like a small area for a camel to dance, like I guess like when donkeys fly. Hakava, Hagama, Hamidi, V'Rakta. Here you have your camel, your Medea, your kava, and you're not dancing, meaning what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Apply it here. You have everything. Why don't you do it? He said, if I will be, even if this person who comes from the idolatrous man would be as holy as Joshua, I still want to give him my offspring. Why does it say Joshua? I had the thought, I don't know if it's good, but I had the thought because Joshua, never says explicitly about his offspring in the Tanakh. We don't know exactly who he married in the Tanakh. And the rabbis say he married Rachel, but it's not explicitly listed. So maybe it means that even Joshua is still looking for a shidduch. I wouldn't give my daughter to Joshua. Amarle. So the student said, Yavik Yeshua ben Nun. Well, he said, if I will be as great as Joshua, Imarlo Yahweh, Achrina Yahivele. He said, if I'd be as great as Joshua, if you wouldn't give me your daughter, I'll get it somebody else's daughter. So he says, but now if you're not going to give me your daughter to marry, nobody else is going to give me their daughter. So he was never letting Rav go. He was harassing him to give him his daughter in marriage. Rav set his eyes upon him and he died. Sometimes if the shidduch isn't working, you got to just move on. And he wasn't ready to do that, so he got the evil eye and he died. Rav Masna Moraboet. There also Rav Masna ruled permissively in such a case. Rav Yehuda Moraboet there. Also Rav Yehuda did. How do we know that? The Kiyatzel came to Rav Yehuda when Rav Yehuda, because what happened was they came in front of Rav Yehuda, Amarei, a person who was born from an idolatrous man and a Jewish woman, and he wanted to know what he should do. Rav Yehuda said to him, Zio Itmar, go and hide, meaning to say, it's true, you're allowed to be married, but hide it from people so that they don't give you a hard time. Oh, Nasiv Bas Minach, or else marry somebody else just like you. Meaning to say, go to a place that they won't recognize you. So this proves that he's allowed to do it. It's just people don't want to do it, but it's allowed. And so too, Kiyasla coming to Rava, Amarle Ogali O Nasif Bas Minach. Rava gave the same idea. He said, either go into exile so nobody knows you and then you can marry whoever you want, or marry a daughter just like you. Meaning to say somebody from an idolatrous man and a Jewish woman. Shalkue B'nei Be Mirsi Rava. So the people from the town of Mirsi sent to Rabba a question, Misha Chatzio Evan v'Chatzio Ben Chorin, somebody who's a half slave and half Ben Chorin, Abal Bas Yisrael Mahu. Somebody who is a half slave, half Ben Chorin, who is with a Jewish woman. So now it's not the same case of an idolater or a slave, it's a half a slave. He's half free and a half slave. And in there with a Jewish woman, what's the law? So the Gemara's first assumption is for sure it's okay, because he's half free. So it's even better than if he was a total slave. So the Gemara says, Hasha Eved Kul Amrin Kasher. Chatz Yomi Baye. So they said, the first response of the Gemara was that the idea is if Rabbah says that even a total slave, the offspring is kosher, for sure, if it's a half a slave, for sure it's going to be okay. So the Gemara, however, that's what Rabbah said. But when Rabbah gave that answer, Rav Yosef, who was the Bar Plukta of Rabbah, he says, Mar Deshmaita. He says, I swear by heaven. He says, it's not so simple. Manu Rav Yehuda. Who is the one who says this? Like Rav Yehuda, that Rav Yehuda says that an idolater and a slave, and an idolater is permitted to come into the community, but hold on. So 1 second. So he says Marda Shmaita. So who is the one who says that the slave and the idolater who was with the Jewish woman is kosher? That's Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Yehuda, but Rav Yehuda himself gave a ruling which shows that it's not so simple in a case where it's a half a slave. Why? Because Rav Yehuda says Misha Chatzu Avachetzu Ben Chorin Abba Bas Yisrael Also Vlad Ein Lo Takana. Rav Yehuda, even though he ruled by a slave and a Jewish woman, that the offspring is going to be kosher, in a situation where it was a half slave, half free with a Jewish woman, there he says the offspring has no takana, the offspring cannot be fixed, i.e., it is a mamzer. So we see that it's not so simple in this case where that the Bema Mirse sent to Rav about this half slave, half free person. Because Rav Yehuda himself seems to be saying it's no good. So the Gemara says, Ki Idmar Rav Yehuda. So the Gemara says, when Rav Yehuda said this, when was he saying that the offspring has no takana, the offspring is a mamzer? He go into Kaddish Bas Yisrael. That's only a circumstance where this Eved, this half-free slave, actually betrothed the Jewish woman, and then he was with her, because what happened was because what happened was, since he was half a slave, So therefore, so since he was half free, that half free element in him betrothed the Jewish woman, and then it was as though the half part of him that was a slave was actually sleeping with the married woman, and that's why the offspring was a mamzer. That's the circumstance that's going on here. The Gemara, so therefore, however, where he didn't betroth her, there the offspring would be kosher. So the Gemara says, "V'ha'amri na'ardai mishmei de Rabbi Yaakov." But it can't be that's the way we have to read it, because we have a statement from the Nardai who said in the name of Rabbi Yaakov, they say, according to the one who says that the offspring of a slave and a Jewish woman is disqualified, they disqualify her as a mamzer even if the woman is a pnuya, even if she's unmarried. And according to the one who says the offspring is kosher, they say it's kosher even by a married woman, that the offspring is not a mamzer. And both of them are deriving their opinion, this opinion from the situation of the wife of a father. The wife of a father, that a person is not allowed to be with their father's wife, that's the source, the origin text for the prohibition of a mamzer. So Manda Pasal Savar, the one who prohibits, meaning all the categories of what's mamzer, is learned that from your father's wife, that there's a prohibition to be with her. So the one who says that the offspring of an idolater and a slave with a Jewish woman is always going to be disqualified as a mamzer. Savar ma eshesav to tafsibo kedushin havlad mamzer. Just like by your father's wife, if you try to marry her, you give her a ring and say, "Be my wife," it's not a valid marriage, and the offspring is a mamzer. I've called it a tafsibo kedushin havlad mamzer. So to any case in where the marriage that you try to effectuate is not a valid marriage, the offspring is a mamzer. And so therefore, the slave and the Jewish woman, the offspring is a mamzer, whether or not she's single or married. And the one who says that the offspring is kosher, it says your father's wife, you can't marry her. And if she wanted to marry another Jew after she was divorced from her father's wife, she'd be totally allowed to. So too, that's the situation. It's only a mamzer if it's a woman who cannot marry any Jew, not just that she can't marry you. This comes to exclude the case of an idolater and a slave, where they can't marry any Jew at all, and so therefore they're always going to be and so therefore they're not going to be a mamzer. The offspring of an idolater and a slave is never going to be a mamzer, because since they can't marry anybody at all, it's a different category. So Elaki Idmar to Rav Yehuda. So it says the Gemara, what was Rav Yehuda talking about when he said that the offspring has no takana? It was not talking about the situation. Why does Rav Yehuda say that the half slave and half free, that the offspring has no takana? It can't be that we're talking about a situation where he did the betrothal, because there we said it shouldn't matter whether she was single or married. So what's this case where Rav Yehuda gave his ruling? So where she was already married to another man, and then this half slave, half free was with her, and so therefore that offspring has no takana, because the side of him that was free was already with a married woman, and so therefore it's like she was with a married woman. Therefore it's like he's with a married woman, and so therefore that offspring is considered a mamzer. So Amar Ravina, Amar Rav Geza, Ikla Rav Yossi bar Abel Asrin, Vav Uvda b'Pnuya. So Ravina said that Rav Geza said that Rav Yossi bar Abel came to our place, and there was an incident with an unmarried woman who was with a slave, Ra'achsher, and he said that the offspring is kosher, because he followed the position of that the offspring of a slave and idolater is kosher, but it was with a married woman, and there he said she was puzzled. The offspring was a mamzer. Amar Rav Sheishis l'didi Amali Rav Geza, and he said, I heard a similar teaching from Rav Geza, but it was not like you said. It was lo Rav Yossi bar Aben Avel, it was Rav Yossi bar Zvida Ave, Va'achsher, and he said the offspring was not a mamzer. When it was bein bepnuya, bein be'eshes ish, that even if the woman was married, if she was with a non-Jewish man, the offspring is not a mamzer, because since the kedushin, the betrothal, is not binding, it's not a binding marriage, So therefore, even with the Ashes Ish, it's not going to be a mamzer. Amalei Ravacha Berei de Rava or Avina, Ikla Meimer Asrin. Meimer came to our place, Asher Bein Bepnuya Bein Be'Ashes Ish. And he says, and indeed, he said that the offspring is kosher, whether she's of an idolater with a Jewish woman, whether she's single or married. The hilchos, and that's the way we rule. That's the halacha the hilchos obik chavim eved al bal bas Yisrael avlad kosher bein bepnuya bein be'ishes ish. And an idolater who sleeps with a Jewish woman, whether or not she's single or married, the offspring is not going to be considered a mamzer. Rava ichsherei or Rav Mari bar Rachel. So Rava came along and allowed Rav Mari bar Rachel to get married, meaning to say, even though he was the offspring of a idolater and a Jewish woman, he said he ruled that such a person can marry a Jewish person, and not only did he allow him to get married, he appointed him as the person in charge of the finances of the Jewish community in Bavel. And even though we have a teaching which we learned in Kedushin also, that Som Tasim Alecha Melech, that you're not allowed to appoint a person who's not of the Jewish community on charge of you, meaning somebody converted, you're not allowed to put them in a position of authority in the Jewish community, which teaches us Kol Masimo Shata Mesim Al Yehu Elam Mikar V'Achecha. All the places that you put down, all the positions that you put down should not be. They have to be from Mikar V'Achecha. They have to be from amongst your brothers. But meaning to say, you're not allowed to put somebody who is not born from the Jewish community in a position of authority. In this circumstance, Kivan the Imo Mi Yisrael, since his mother was from the Jewish people, we're calling him as though he's part of the Jewish community. And so this is also a halacha that people have to be careful about that. Even though if a person converts, we say that the person converts is Jewish, but still this law applies that the person should not be in a position of authority, like for example, the president of a synagogue in charge of the Jewish community. Avdei Rebbe Chia bar Ami, it below ahi ovedes kochavim with shame intita. So we say that what happened was that the servant of Reb Chia bar Ami immersed an idolatrous woman for the purpose of nida. L'shem intita here means Rashi says l'shem tfilas nida, below l'shem tfilas gerish. She was immersed for the purpose of becoming purified from her menstrual cycle, but not for the purpose of conversion, supposedly. So then what happened was, Amar Rav Yosef says, Yachilna la'achshure. I'm able to say that she is kosher, that she's a Jew. Ba, meaning to say I can say that she is kosher. Uba birta, not only her, but also her daughter. Ba, the reason why I'm saying that she is kosher, Rav Asi. Rav Asi, Milo Tavo Lindosa. Rav Asi would say she did immerse. Of course, she immersed for nida purposes, but it's obviously the case she's immersing because she thinks she's Jewish. So therefore, that if you immerse thinking that you're just being immersed from your period in the mikvah, that also counts as a conversion. And Bebarta, and the reason why I'll say her daughter is going to be a good Jew is because the slave and the Jewish woman makes a good Jew. The offspring is a good Jew. So there was a certain person who they used to call him the son of an Aramean woman because his mother did the conversion, but she didn't immerse. Rav Asi said, yeah, she did convert. She did immerse. She immersed for nida, and it was the same. Her intent was really to be Jewish also at the same time. There was a person they were calling the son of an Aramean, and Rabbi Shimon Levi, he says, no, his father was Jewish. His father immersed. He immersed on his own, and he immersed for the purpose of being purified, because after you have an emission, you're supposed to immerse before you can study Torah. And so he immersed for that. And so clearly somebody who's immersing for that also thinks that they're Jewish. So it's like he immersed for the purpose of being Jewish. So Amar Rav Chama bar Guri, Amar Rav Halkech Evan Mina Ovik Chavim. Because of, okay, we'll stop here. God willing, we're going to do the Daf Yomi for